the disadvantage of talking during the graveyard session is that even yourself as a speaker, you feel like dozing a little bit. So, but I will try to navigate through my talk. I want to talk about the contribution of indigenous knowledge system in management of Brackenrigea zanguebarica. So I'll be going through some of their techniques, just unpacking them, looking at them through the perception of the local people, and particularly on this species, Brackenrigea zanguebarica, yellow peeling plain. Okay, so as a way of giving some introduction to my talk, I want us to look at the issues around the Convention of Biological Diversity, wherein we can agree that there are some goals that were indicated during the convention when it was signed, which South Africa is part of the treaty. Among the goals, actually 3 of them, one was to look at the conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of its components, fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the genetic resources. I hope all of us, we do agree with these goals as conservationists. But the main objective of this was to develop national strategies. In other words, countries of the world that formed part of the treaty, they have to come up with national strategies that will make sure that there is conservation and sustainable use of biological resources. However, if you look at the formula in South Africa around conservation, indeed it has to be something that is more flexible, which is also user-friendly, looking at the multiple use policy. You can also think about your biosphere reserves. I think those are the concepts that are coming in to try to make sure that indeed we have that kind of flexible conservation approach towards our natural resources. So when we look at the background around resource management, I think it is clear that, of course, there's been some natural resource management system that existed over the years amongst the indigenous African people. So they had a way of managing those natural resources. And they were particularly spearheaded by institutions which were led by traditional leaders as well as traditional healers. So they made it their point that they continue to monitor the natural resources that are within their proximity. And of course, it is also clear that African people appreciated nature, thereby incorporating it in their daily lives through the metaphors that they came up with, the folklore stories. Most of the stories will find that they will talk about natural resources, and even their belief system also tie together with the natural resource around them. So the plan that I wanted to talk about, going through these indigenous techniques of conservation, is Brackenrigea zanguebarica. It's locally known as Ngtabatsindi. Bear in mind there are people that are referred to as Batabatsindi in this particular area. So this particular plant, it belongs to the family Ochnesi, and of course it's popular because of its magic, and it's known as a magic tree. You see, the species is very much poorly distributed. In the whole of South Africa, it's found in this particular point. It's only found in this area called Tengwe, and it's a very small population. So, which means in South Africa, it's only there. You get rid of that one, then we are less one species in South Africa. And the uses, okay, now, I don't know. Like I've indicated, when it comes to the uses, there are quite a number of uses for medicinal purposes, but the species is known for its magical purposes, like the protection of people and homesteads against evil people, you know, because evil people are there, whether we like it or not. So that plant can protect you from evil people. And of course, this one is a bit controversial, but believe you me, sportsmen, they like this, to have something to can discourage the opponents. So, yeah. So no wonder some of the PSL club visit our area quite often. And then when we look at the conservation status, the conservation status of this particular plant is critically endangered. You see, when you look at that status, from there you go to extinct in the wild, and then you go to extinct. But with this one, it means if we move from this status, we'll be just going directly to extinct because, I mean, it's only found in that particular area, nowhere else. And of course, okay. Now, the techniques that I wanted to talk about is the taboos, the rituals, the myths, as well as traditional rules and regulations. So in terms of taboos, of course, when we talk about taboos, these are restrictions that are put on certain activities through social customs. So, and because of that, at times, taboos can be broken, particularly during times of scarcity. People tend to break the taboos. But nevertheless, with this particular plant, it's unfortunate that you are not seeing this pig, but because I've got a fence here of a yard. So what people normally do, the old men in the house, they will collect the poles for the fence and then make the fence either for a homestead or for a kraal for cattle or goats. And then the old man will say to the family, there is a pole of Mutabatsindi amongst these poles, Brackenrigea. They will say there is some Brackenrigea. By so doing, he knows, because people are not supposed, especially sexually active people, are not supposed to touch Brackenrigea. If you are a man, you touch it, you become sterile. And then if you are a woman, you touch it, you go straight into your periods. So you don't like to just suddenly go into that state. So normally they will not touch the fence. But that thing, it has a conservation connotation in the sense that it means that the old men will not frequent the field to go and collect the poles for the fence because the fence will remain intact because of that particular taboo. So it played a role. Even if the pole is lying down on the ground, no one will touch it until the old men can come and fix the fence. So in terms of rituals, rituals usually are accompanied by some kind of actions. It can be through some poets or some words as a customary way of making sure that, particularly when it comes to medicine, that the medicine becomes effective. So with this particular species, Brackenrigea zanguebarica, Mutabatsindi, the collection is normally done during the night for it to be effective, since it has to be done by a naked person. Otherwise, the traditional healers, if they are collecting themselves, they also have to perform some rituals. That might even include spitting of saliva before they can collect the materials from the plants, because if they don't do that, the perception is that it might not work. Okay, yeah, I'm left with 5 minutes. I don't know whether that time of that thing was taken care of. Anyway, there are myths as well. Myths, of course, they goes around also with traditional stories, which are taken further through generations. And of course, with this particular plant, again, in terms of collection, if it's not done by a Mutabatsindi, a dedicated person, you see, they will select somebody from the family and then dedicate that person to be the collector, usually an old man, because like I've indicated, if you are young enough, you wouldn't like to do that. And then the other thing is that they believe that this particular species cannot grow anywhere. They believe this is their plant. They've been given this plant by God. So it's their plant. You cannot grow it anywhere. And indeed, we have tried to grow it outside of that area, and it's not so successful. And again, the last one that I wanted to talk about is the issue of traditional rules and regulations, wherein, of course, the traditional leaders take the lead in making sure that they control the resources within their area. And in this particular case, usually with this species, if you are seen just collecting medicinal materials around this particular area, then you are called at the tribal authority, and then some fines are meted out. And of course, there is also a period for collecting medicinal materials. that people should know about as managed by the traditional leaders. Like, they don't collect material, particularly this species is not collected during summer seasons. They believe that if you collect it during summer seasons, you might be inviting lightnings in your house. So people wouldn't dare do that. So we have done a number of research around this particular plant. We looked at the nature reserve, because there is a nature reserve now that has been proclaimed around this particular species. We did some research looking at the size, whether it is big enough to can carry a viable population. We did some population studies. We also reviewed the threats as well. So, yeah, out of the population studies that we did in a number of years, what is so concerning is the fact that now the population, instead of having that inverse J shape, which will be showing that there is a lot of seedlings, it's now becoming a bell shape, which, of course, though it's a bell shape, it's regarded as a normal curve, but in this particular case, in terms of plant population, it can be problematic because you might not have enough seedlings. Okay, yeah. Of course, I spoke about this issue that the reserve has now been proclaimed by the Limpopo provincial government. Around this particular issue, of course, the reserve is called Brackenrigea Nature Reserve, and people know that this is the Mutabatsindi Nature Reserve. I don't know whether it's the name that is attracting thugs to go in there, because now they know if they want Mutabatsindi, they just go to the reserve. So they wait for the workers to go home, and then they'll go inside and then take the materials. And of course, there are efforts that we are trying to do in terms of propagation, like I've indicated. There is a picture here which is showing that some of, at least through cuttings, we are able to propagate some of this particular plant. One thing that is quite amazing is that although this plant is critically endangered, it doesn't make it into the tree list of South Africa, the protected tree list. It's not making it. When you look at it, then you start to question yourself, why, how is it possible that this particular plant, which is so critically endangered, is not making it on the list? You look at the criteria, and then you might think that it is satisfying all of them. I don't know, but it's something that needs to be debated. And then, of course, in conclusion, let me indicate that there is undisputed facts that indeed there is a strong link that exists between traditional leaders, land, as well as life. Of course, there is the issue of middlemen, which is also a challenge and threatening the species, because with middlemen, it means that those who need materials, they can just go to a local person there, and then that person can collect material for them. Of course, because that person will be unsuspicious, they can collect and then take the material to the people that need the material. And those middlemen, usually they don't observe these kind of indigenous techniques. Nevertheless, you see, whether these indigenous techniques make sense or not, I think like what the previous speaker was saying, it's upon us to encourage those activities that indeed have some positive bearing on our efforts of conservation. If they do make a positive bearing, let us encourage them. Let us encourage them to continue observing these kind of techniques, and then our species will be safe. So thank you very much.